right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Training, Learning, and Development Communities Productivity Playlist. We have episode 2 this morning. Very excited about this. Joe Ganci is our guest. And so, Joe, thank you so much for coming in. And thanks, everybody, for you live show attendees in there. Looks like we've got Joe Pulicino's in here. I don't know if you remember Joe at all, Joe, but Joe used to be the research director over at the Guild years and years ago.
Yeah, the name is really familiar. I kind of remember it.
Yeah, Carrie and Gordon, Erica, Cindy, thanks for coming in. Ava, Jane, thanks again for everything. Michael, I'm looking forward to this talk with Joe, because one of my 2020 things is to learn Adobe XD a little better, and so this might help me a little bit in that endeavor as well. But before we get started, I actually have a couple questions for you, Joe, that I wanted to ask, because
I have a quick question for you. I'm only seeing myself in the list of attendees here. Is that
in the list of what?
Well, I look over on the side and I see chat and I see people. I only see myself in that list.
You don't see yourself?
I only see myself. I see only myself.
Oh, I don't know. That's strange. I'd have to take.
I think it's must be the way I came in. I don't know. All right. Well, you let me know if there's any questions or anything, because I can't see anything right now, I guess. All right.
Oh, you can't see the chat. Is that what you're saying?
The chat is empty. Like, there's nothing there.
Oh, that's weird. Why don't you refresh real quick and see if that fixes it?
Oh, okay, sure.
And then maybe we'll see. Hopefully, if that'll fix it. But I'm going to tell Joe I do have a couple questions that I wanted to ask him, just because Joe, I have known for years and years and years. I think like we probably met in the early 2000s, and I wanted to ask you a couple sort of productivity tool related questions that I wanted to see, being in the industry as long as you have. What is this, over 30 years or something like that?
Yeah, golly, 37 years come May. Yeah, 37 years. Oh, that's crazy.
So almost 40. That's kind of nuts. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything.
40 years married, though, in February next month. So 40 years married and 37 in the industry. Yeah.
So this is what I want to know. In the history of you working in the e-learning industry, what are the top 3 e-learning tools that you think you've ever used? The top 3. Doesn't have to be your current top 3, like, not ones for 2020, but I want to know, I know you were a huge fan of Authorware. Just, I'm curious.
I've used a lot of different tools over time, because the very first tool I used was one that, of course, is no longer around now, but it was mini computer based. It was called Ticket, TICCIT, and that's where I got my start. In fact, I'm going to be interviewing this week my boss at the time, who just retired, because he's got a wealth of history behind him as well regarding that. Okay, so the top 3, I would say definitely Authorware. Authorware was, for me and for many others out there too, who are still mourning its loss in the industry. Oops, sorry about that. Let me shut off my phone. I turned it on because I thought you might be trying to call me, but all right. Authorware, a lot of people are still mourning its loss. It was Michael Allen's baby, of course. And he is a big name in the industry. He's been around forever. He started at Control Data a long time ago. Anyway, the point is that it was a tool that was very flexible, I won't say it was very easy for a lot of people, but it was easier than a lot of tools. Anyway, but at the same time had a huge, strength behind it. Okay, so that was number 1. And then I guess I would have to give a tie then between 3 others. So, I'm going to say I've enjoyed using Captivate, Storyline, and Lectura, all for different reasons.
Really?
Yeah, each one has its own strengths and weaknesses, and so depending on what I need to create, I might prefer one over the other. Captivate is the one I use the most, because a lot of it's sort of like success breeds success. If people know that you're a big Captivate expert, they're going to send Captivate work your way, right? But when I have a choice in the matter, then I'm going to analyze what the client is trying to get done, and then choose one of those 3 to do it. So yeah.
Excellent. So if you were to recommend to somebody that was like an aspiring e-learning developer, a tool to become
start with,
which one would it be? Would it be Captivate?
That's a hard question, and the reason I say that is because, uh, as I said, each tool has its strengths and weaknesses. So I would say, first of all, it depends on the background of the person. If they're strictly an instructional designer who's never done a lick of any kind of coding or anything like that, I would say start with Storyline. It's the easiest one to start with. It's got a lot of great features. You can do most things you want to do. In fact, you may decide. Here's the funny part. I'm stepping all over myself, but it's because it's a tough question. The reason is this. I came to a realization a long time ago that when you are quite familiar with a tool, whichever tool it might be, and a requirement comes your way to create learning, you tend to not think about what is the best approach, what are the best features, etc. for my learner audience. Instead, you start thinking about what can I do with my tool to make this the best possible learning experience. And that's a fallacy. We all fall into it. And so the reason I say that is because if I say, for instance, you can do most everything you want to do in Storyline, well, there are going to be people out there who are going to say, well, I can't think of anything I can't do in Storyline. And that's because they always focus on what the Storyline features are, and they know them really well. And so they're going to create their learning based on those features. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so the same thing happens with Captivate. The same thing happens with Lectora. Any tool you use, you tend to focus on. I'm getting a little dog hair on me from my dog. We just adopted a 7-year-old dog from the shelter, and he's a joy, but he's a little bit shedding. Anyway, the thing is that whatever tool that a person uses, they tend to focus on it. So I would say, though, if someone has no background in any kind of coding, etc., Storyline is easiest, but Captivate is very close to that when it comes to being able to use it without any kind of coding. On the other hand, if you're looking for a little more power, more features, there's definitely a lot more of those in Captivate. But then again, you may never use them, or you may use them, especially if you know about them. That's the problem with any tool, is if you don't really know the tool, all the features, and you use them over time, you tend to limit yourself. And so that's what I'm sorry. It's a really hard question to answer. I wish I could just say it definitely should always be this one, but no, it really depends. And I hate saying it depends, but that's the way it works. I would ask the person a number of things before I would tell them which one I would recommend they start with. And then by the same token, I've had a lot of organizations actually hire me to help them decide on which tool they should standardize on. And again, I don't just blurt out whatever. They hire me because I have to analyze their needs, their developer base or designer base, instructional designer base, and then I'll recommend something to them. Sometimes it's been Captivate, so other times it's been in Storyline or a different tool.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Have you written anything about that experience at all? Because it seems like that would be really, really helpful for a lot of people out there.
It's been a couple of years now, but I did write. If you go to my LinkedIn page, there's a link there to an article. Well, it's not just an article. I wrote a couple of years ago. I don't. Maybe it's a year and a half. Maybe it's 2 years. Maybe it's longer now. I don't know. Anyway, it was. I wrote an article called "The Things I Love About Storyline That I'm Missing in Captivate," and I wrote another called "The Things I Love About Captivate That I'm Missing in Storyline." At the time, the list for Captivate was much longer because Storyline was still is a newer tool than Captivate. Of course, it always will be because Captivate's been around longer. But at the same time, there were several features in Storyline that I really wish were in Captivate. This is why I say I'm never happy with any tool, because I'm always wishing that it had features from a different one. So I did that, and then I created 2 YouTube videos, which you can also find on my YouTube page, but you can also find it in the link in the articles, and showing the different features, why I like each for different reasons. So yeah, I did write that. Anybody can go and look at it, but of course, remember that was a couple of years ago. Yeah. A lot of new features have been added to both tools since then. So there are it certainly needs updating.
I'll
but
check it out.
still,
I'll link to
yeah.
them in the show notes because I think that'd be handy. And Kristen, before we get started about your productivity,
Uh-huh.
Kristen does ask a question. She says, "I know you're a big proponent of storyboarding. Do you recommend storyboarding in a software agnostic way, if possible, to get those requirements down?"
And again, by the way, I'm sorry, I did refresh, but I still can't see, for whatever reason, I can't see the chat. Normally, when I come into TLDC, I can see everything, but for whatever reason, right now I can't. So I don't know why. Um, so yes, I am a big advocate of storyboarding, but you have to understand why that is. So let me just say as quickly as I can. First of all, there's at least 2 or 3 big reasons why. One is that I work with external clients. I'm an independent contractor, and so part of making sure that a storyboard is created is so that I can avoid any misunderstandings later. You know, if people if they approve the storyboard, then that's what I'm going to build towards. And if I don't have a storyboard, then it's they can always come back and say, well, that's not what we had in mind or whatever. But it's sort of like a documentation point where they can sign off on it. But there have been many times that I've not used a strict storyboard like that, instead used rapid prototyping approach, which I actually prefer when possible, because the end result is usually much nicer and better. But then, again, it depends. If I'm working with large organizations, storyboarding seems to make a lot more sense for them. So that's number one. Number two is that if you keep the storyboard updated as much as possible, as all the time, then again, you have a record of all that as well. Having said that, I've storyboarded in many different ways, including XD, which I'm going to show you today, and I'll show you why, but also um, when I am doing it in some kind of a document like Word, instead I'm using now Google Docs and Google Sheets and all those, because it always has every change ever made. You can always go back to whatever history point you want, and that way it also helps to see where changes were made and misunderstandings happen, maybe that sort of thing, to avoid. I try to avoid anything like that, any problems like that. So again, it's all based on that. So hopefully that helps.
No, that definitely helps. That's fascinating. I'd love to. Yeah, I actually would love to see that process. That sounds really, really interesting.
Oh yeah, well, it's pretty simple. If you set up a Google Doc, um, it's basically, I think it's a year, maybe even longer, maybe it's forever, I don't know. But there's always that history tab that you can go to, and you can see every version of that document in history. So it's as simple as that. So yeah, and you can name them, so you can always say this was the milestone, X, milestone Y, whatever, as well. But
Love
yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that another time too.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, that's awesome, Joe. Well, let's
Mhm.
get into it. Let's get into this discussion about Adobe XD. It was sort of when you submitted what you wanted to talk about. I was sort of surprised to hear about the fact that that it was great at exporting graphics and and
Yeah.
use it as a storyboarding tool. So
One thing I should say right away is that I'm not an XD expert. In other words, I don't, I'm not the guy who actually does most of the storyboarding here when I'm using XD. That's actually something that is done by the art team, So, and this is where I need to close this one out. Okay. Okay, I think you can see my screen, right?
I can see your screen. Looks great.
Okay, very good. So XD, I know enough to be dangerous. I use it, and in fact, it's hard to be an expert in XD because it's constantly being updated with new features all the time. And it should be noted, by the way, that XD is free. You can get it for free. There's no reason that you have to have a license to a subscription to the Creative Cloud or anything else like that, because they made it available for free at least over a year ago now, I think. So, you can always download XD for free as well, and it's constantly being updated with new features all the time. I seem to get a weekly notice about that, if not sometimes more frequent than that, to update my XD. Maybe I'm just imagining that it's that frequent, but it seems to be very, very frequent. So XD is used for a lot of different reasons, but for storyboarding, I love it. And here's some of the reasons why. I created a small sample here. When you are working with an art team, especially, they tend to use. Sorry, gotta get over here. They tend to use things like Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, and tools that are similar to that. From both of those, you can, of course, export in many different formats. And there are a couple of formats that come into play here. Of course, any kind of graphic format like PNGs or GIFs or JPEGs, of course, can be output, and those can be imported as well. Now, but the important thing here is that, in fact, you can copy and paste between like Illustrator and XD as well. The important thing, though, is that if your tool is able to use SVGs, scalable vector graphics, which a number of tools do now, including Adobe Captivate, although last I heard Storyline doesn't yet, but I might be mistaken about that. I haven't checked it lately, but I don't think it can yet. Scalable vector graphics, the reason why I started using XD at all was because I had a client a couple of years ago that wanted to be able to zoom in on their learning to any degree and not see any kind of pixelation in images or text, okay? So to do that, I determined that we couldn't just work with JPEGs or GIFs or whatever, because you do get pixelation when you zoom in. Instead, SVGs allow you to, or scalable vector graphics allow you to do that. I'm going to illustrate first in Captivate how that works, because I want you to understand why SVGs are so cool that way. If I, well, actually, I'll just do it from here. If I were to come in XD right now and say I select something here, I can select whole boards, I can select a whole file and output it, or I can select one item as well anytime I want. So then I can export that. And when I go to export, you'll see that I have different options up here. Like I can do some, batch ones or individual ones, etc. And that's not what I wanted. I was trying to do this. I wanted to export that particular one, the selected item. And then you see I can export as, for design purposes, a PNG, an SVG, even a PDF or a JPEG, right? But if I go to web, I can also then go to SVG, which is scalable vector graphics, and then I can also select iOS or Android. That's kind of a new features as well, newer anyway. So if I output something as a PNG, of course, it's going to have the same advantages and disadvantages of any kind of PNG. If I do SVG, on the other hand, when I export that, let me do that. I'm going to put it right on my desktop. That's fine. So now it's out there, and when I bring that into Captivate as an SVG, not as a normal image, but as SVG, so I'll go to my desktop and bring that in right there. I believe that's the one. The nice thing about that is now that it's now in Captivate as an SVG. So if I were then to take this image, call it an image, although it's not really an image, and I'll explain the difference between SVGs and others in a moment. If I were to resize this greatly, in fact, I'm going to zoom way out here so we can really see. Now, this is the stage size, right? I mean, it's zoomed out, so it's really not that small. But if I were to take this and expand it out like so, you're going to see some pixelation until I let go of the mouse. You can kind of see it in the curves especially. But as soon as I let go of the mouse, you'll see that it's going to then become clear again. And if I zoom back in, especially, you'll be able to see that again. So here's the the large version. If I bring this down and bring it up, bring it down again, here we go. So now you'll see that if I were to try to expand this out, it's going to look a little pixel. You can actually see the pixelation, although I'm not sure how well it's coming across in the broadcast. But then when I let go, you'll see, boom, it's going to become beautiful again. And that's exactly what they wanted. And I fell in love with this whole idea because, first of all, SVGs are much smaller than standard images. But keep in mind that they're not photographs. These are all designs. And that's really the way a lot of e-learning is going nowadays. I've had several clients now who didn't want photographs. It's kind of old school now with the idea of people sitting around a boardroom or somebody working at his desk, that type of thing. Instead, they want to have drawn images like these, and that's really where you have an advantage with using Photoshop, Illustrator, etc. Or you can create things directly in XD, but the kinds of things you can create in XD are not normally. It would be much easier to create this in Illustrator or Photoshop. But you can also, of course, create things, any kind of shapes and such, and fill them any way you like. So there's a lot of things you can do directly in XD as well. So I hope I'm not stating something that everybody already knows. I don't think I am. But if you were to look at that SVG file right now, let me open that up so you can see it. I really should clean up my desktop. It's on the other screen right now. I'm just going to bring it over. When you open up an image, a standard image in a tool, any tool that you have at your disposal, you're going to see that it's going to be it's an image. In fact, if you click on an image file in Windows or Mac, you're going to see a preview of that image. But if I click on one of these in Windows, I don't see any kind of preview. And in fact, hold on, let me move this to the right place so you can see it better. Well, in fact, what you're going to see is what looks like an Internet Explorer image right there. So let me show you that extra large. See, it looks like an Internet Explorer image because really it's associating it with browsers and it's using its own, If I were to double click on this, in fact, it opens up the browser and shows it to me right there. And again, I can, zoom in and out of here and take a look at it. But in reality, I don't see any preview over here because it's not really an image file. If I would open this up in something like brackets or any kind of node editor, you'll see that, in fact, this is not pixels at all. In fact, it's going to be a lot it's like an XML file is what it is. And so you'll see it has all of these numbers and definitions, like this is a group and this is a path and so on. And all of that to be in here, there's rectangles and so on in here. All of that is what you have to hard code by hand. No, you don't have to hard code any of this, okay? Because this is what you create in something like Photoshop or Illustrator or any tool that does SVGs. And it then saves it out as this kind of file, which then allows it to be so flexible because these numbers and all these are really not specific like pixel locations. They're all, in essence, computational numbers that allow you to size anything to whatever size you want, and it in turn uses those to either multiply up or down the different locations and sizes of things. The other reason that this comes in really handy, and again, now I'm gonna step away from the SVG idea, even if you're just using this as PNGs or whatever. So if your tool doesn't use SVGs, no worries. There's still a lot of use here. First of all, when you get a storyboard like this from your artist, one of the nice things that we do, let me zoom out a bit, is one thing that we came to agree on is that it's really nice to be able to see a progression. So in this case, the artist is saying, we want to start with this, and then we want to add this, add the next, etc. So the storyboard is actually much more illustrative than normally you might see in something like Word or PowerPoint, unless you create multiple slides. Because here, these slides can stack in any way you wish. So we're stacking them one on top of the other to show this is really just one slide in Captivate or Storyline, or one page in Lectora, but it's building. So we have the next, the next, the next. And meanwhile, we also have a script, of course, that is going to be synchronized to these changes, so we know exactly when we're going to bring in this element, this element, this element, etc. Okay, does that make sense?
It does. Joe, I have a quick question. So did you create these slides in XD, or did you create them in another program and then export them into XD?
Oh, yeah, sorry. In this case, the artist was creating these in Illustrator and then exporting them as XD slides. That's what she told me she did. And I know at the very least what you can do is copy and paste from Illustrator to here. So as I said, most of the things like this image especially and other things, some things you can create directly in XD, like, of course, the text or any shapes, things like that. So a lot of what you see right here, yeah, you could do directly in XD. But if you're going to be creating something in Illustrator or Photoshop, then you can output those as SVGs and bring those directly into XD as well. And that's what she was doing in the first case, in the first project that I worked on. That's exactly what she was doing. She was loving it. She was creating everything in the normal way that she was used to, but then she was exporting it all as XD files and SVG files. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah. And the main thing is for that is because it's just easier to edit these in XD. Is that why? Like, because you can just take them as a group like this and be able to zoom in?
There's a few different reasons. One is that it's much easier for someone like me, coder, who doesn't really know an Illustrator very well. And Photoshop can do things like this too, but to a much lesser degree than Illustrator. Illustrator is made for creating vector-based images, and so it's all about things like SVG or other formats that are vector-based, right? So for me, being able to have this as an entry method was very useful, because not only can I open this very easily in many different ways, but also I can. This is what I was going to say next. Actually, is the artist in this case was very, very particular about where things should be placed on the screen. Okay, and that was her job. Her job was by the client being told, Joe's going to follow your lead when it comes to screen layout and everything else. So I can always come over here and take a look. Okay, where is this on the screen? What is the W and X on there? You really can't do that in Illustrator or Photoshop per se. I mean, you can, but it's not as easy. Here, you can click on any element and see exactly where the X and Y is for that, and use that in your own tool to make sure it's exactly in the same place. Okay, so it's also a guide in many other ways for that. As I was saying, it also helps you to show the build option for every slide, where you really, again, can't really do that easily in Photoshop or Illustrator. So I'm showing how this thing is going to build from slide to slide, or how things will change. Sorry, on one slide, how things will change from step to step, I should say, within that slide. So this is slide 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3. It's still slide 2, but things are building. So that's why XD is also another good reason. But there's also a good one here, and I think I remember where to do that here, because first of all, there's different ways you can look at mobile preview, etc. You can also take a look, and you can post this online. The storyboard, as a storyboard, you can say, here is the here's the storyboard, and online you can set this up on for free on the Adobe site. It's a free option, and you can have them go through the different slides and comment on them as well. And so if there's any changes to be made, you can have those made before any coding takes place. So we start out here, and then we go on to, in fact, as you can see here, There's a left and right button. Those are automatic unless there's another element already on the screen, like a button that we put in XD that allows them to go forward, like enter here. This is the first slide. So this actually almost feels like you're actually in the e-learning, even though the e-learning hasn't even been created yet, because here we click on enter. Now for the rest of this, there are things happening in the learning, which I created in Captivate in this case, where there's also the narration and such that is happening, but these are automatic. So these don't appear in the Captivate, but they do appear in the XD for purposes of being able to review this and make sure it looks good before we actually take the time to code it all. Okay. So is that clear? Because
yeah, no, it's fascinating. So basically, once you have all of this in XD, all these slides, and and the storyboard is approved, then you start going through the process of just taking the images, exporting them out into some type of a organizational directory, and then just like building the Captivate sequence out.
Yeah, like I've just selected all. I can export out this whole storyboard as one as well. So do a batch or go selected depending on how I want to do it. If I go to selected, it's going to if I go to batch, it's going to give me a separate. It's going to separate everything out for me so that I can place things exactly how I want them in Captivate. But the nice thing is that by bringing them in as finished slides, things are automatically going to be placed anyway. So I don't have to take the time to do that unless there's a change that has to be made, and then I can go back in and see where the change happened here. So when I go to batch this and do it SVG and say, okay, let's do that. Don't do it there. Let's move it to the XD folder here. Then what I'm going to see is that it's exporting all the different assets in there. And now when I go to the XD folder, all of them are listed in here as well. And I can use them as I wish. And but I also have the original XD file if I want to open that up. The nice thing about XD too is it's easy enough that I never had a problem just going directly into the XD file if I wanted something and being able to use it myself. But the artist was normally also exporting all the separate pieces as well, and naming them so that I can know where to use them in the e-learning.
No, that's great. This is awesome. And Carol says she's coming in a little late, and she asks, aren't you doing double work though? Why not just create it in the e-learning software? But I don't know if you want to answer that, Joe, but I can just quickly tell you, Carol, it's because there was an actual designer that was working in Illustrator and creating some of the primary assets. And then Joe was using XD as the storyboarding tool to get those assets organized and come up with the working storyboard that can be approved and et cetera. And then once that was ready to go, then we can push it out to Captivate for the final product.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Carol. And yeah, you did miss a little bit earlier, but that's and Luis just covered it pretty well. In addition to that, because they can review the storyboard online from XD much more easily, it's just a one-click thing and it's ready for review. They found it much easier to go through and do their review. And if we need to make changes, we can make those pretty quickly and easily, usually in XD directly or not. And then when we bring them into Captivate, it's already done in essence. We don't have, it's not really double work in a sense because we're not really having to do things by hand. Well, yes, by hand. We're not really doing it from scratch, I should say. Let me share my screen one more time. I forgot to show something here. Let's see, share screen. Yeah. Okay. And share that again. Okay. All right. So there's a new feature that came out in Captivate last year, and that is that when you have an SVG like this, you can even edit it directly in Captivate in many ways. Not necessarily, as much as you can. Well, certainly not as much as you can in Illustrator or whatever. But see here, I can click on this, say, and if the client says, "Oh, we want this to be reddish instead," well, see, I can now come over here and just change that to a reddish tone, or red itself, and it's now red. And I can do that with any piece of this. So whatever way this SVG is built, I now have access to all the different pieces of that and being able to change colors, and in fact even change a few other things besides that, like the opacity of that as well. So this is a nice feature as well that's been added. Mostly I use it to change colors, but I can also do things like, take the whole opacity level and make it different as well. When I go to edit SVG, you'll see I have the option of editing with Adobe Illustrator, or I can edit it with whatever tool I want. But typically I wasn't doing that here. The artist in this case was doing that. If you're doing it all by yourself, then yes, you want to be able to go back and forth, and then you can decide, well, this is a simple change I can make directly in, Captivate in this case, or whatever tool you might be using, or I'm going to need to go back to XD, or even go back to Illustrator. It depends on what the change requires. If it's something big, like, I'm going to take out a few pieces and move other pieces around, then you probably want to go back to Illustrator. You can go to XD and do a lot of that as well. But again, it gets to a point where, oh yes, this would be easier in Illustrator. So that's all I'm trying to say, is it's nice to have the choice of being able to jump between the different tools and make those changes when depending on what the change is and how big that change is that needs to be made.
No, that's great, Joe. These are some great tips. This is fantastic. I love it. I definitely am going to, I'll probably just keep Adobe XD open all the time on my computer, so it forces me to get in there and play around with it.
Yeah, and as I said, it's hard to be an expert all the time because it's being updated all the time, always new features. But I'm getting better and better at it all the time as well. Because the artist was mainly the XD expert in this case, I never found a real need or time. The need is what dictates the time to take, but to become an expert. But now I'm finding I'm enjoying it so much that I'm just getting better and better at it. And Carol had a second question: is this a support to particular Storyline 360 as well? In XD, what I showed earlier was that you can export as any kind of image file, PNGs or JPEGs, etc. But I don't believe a Storyline currently supports SVGs. So the only downside is that you won't be able to use SVGs, which are smaller files that also scale very, very well. On the other hand, if you're using a lot more photographs as images rather than drawn images, then it doesn't really matter because those don't translate well into SVGs. If you try to take I said the SVGs are smaller files, and that's because they are drawn. And so in essence, they are polygons and colors and gradients and things like that. But if you had a photograph and you try to turn it to SVG, it would become huge because most photographs don't translate well into shapes. They're just a bunch of pixels that mean something to us when we look at the image.
Yeah, John asked a question: did I misunderstand, or can the entire XD slide then be imported into Captivate? Want to take that one, Joe?
Actually, oh, I'm sorry. I see it now. I was looking at another one after that. You can, to a degree, and I think actually I should really test that again because I remember doing that, but I found myself actually taking the individual elements more so. But no, really, let me try that now because I want to remember. But yes, I believe it is. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is. Let me try it again right now because I want to just, I'm going to select this one right here and export it out. Yeah, in fact, what am I thinking? Of course, this is how it's done. If I select this as one, okay, so I'm going to export that out. I hope I can see that which one it is now, because if I go back now into here and let me go to details and go to the last one done, which would be that one. Okay, so that one is the whole group, and if I were to bring that in as an SVG, you'll see it comes in. Oh, I didn't. I just chose the rectangle. That's why it says rectangle. Sorry about that. Let's see. This would be.
Yeah, we can't really see your screen, Joe.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
But it's okay. I think that. Yeah. I think.
Okay, hold on. Let me do that. Yep. Sorry, I forgot I turned that off. Let me try that again. All right. Share screen. And show and share. Okay. So in XD, you can see it now, right?
Yeah.
In XD, if I come back here and I select this whole thing and then say I want to export the batch, I believe this is correct. Yes, I want to go in there, export. Okay, sorry, I literally wasn't ready for this question because, and I should have been, because this is one that is a really good one. Let's see, did I do that wrong? Export. I want to export this. If I try to export it this way, no, it's still trying to export them as separate pieces. So, but I'm almost positive there's a way to do it because I remember doing it before. So I'll tell you what, I'm gonna have to follow up with this one and get back to you on that because I'm pretty sure you can. If you select that and then export it, you should be able then to. In fact, let me try one more thing. I'm gonna copy this whole thing right here to the clipboard because in Captivate you do have the ability to bring in SVGs. Well, I don't think it's letting me do it that way either. Edit. Nope. Sorry. Cannot. Okay. Sorry. I have to go back and take a look at that. And if I'm babbling, I told Luis before the hand I didn't get much sleep last night. I apologize, but I'm trying to stay sane here.
Right.
Let me get back to.
And we'll follow up with John. I'll find your email, John, and we'll hit you up and see if we can send you an answer for that one. Well, Joe, we're going to wrap up. I know that it's funny trying to program the playlist sessions to be 15 to 30 minutes, but everyone just loves talking about stuff. It's really, really good. We get Q&A and everything. So, but you've been so generous with your time. Thank you so much for showing this. Jane is saying, I'm new to XD, keen to give it a go, and thanks for the tips, Joe. I am very thankful for this. I'm probably going to post this one on YouTube if that's okay with you, because I think that this one
it's fine. I just wish I was a little more coherent this time around. And also,
I'll edit and post.
Well, that's okay. And by the way, Kristen had pointed out the SVG import via PowerPoint in Storyline. That is an option. It doesn't come in, of course, as SVGs, I don't think, but it does work. I mean, it comes in as images, but it does work as well. So you don't have to rule out SVGs altogether in Storyline because they can come in via PowerPoint. So it's extra steps, but it can be done. Sorry, go ahead.
Excellent. Yeah. All right, Joe, thank you so much. Thanks for covering all this for us, Joe, and everybody out there. Thanks for coming in this morning. Tomorrow, we've got Kristen is going to be on with a discussion about the latest, the Fall XAPI cohort. So I'm looking for that tomorrow morning. If you haven't already registered for it, you can find a link here in Crowdcast or on the tldc.us website. And then on Friday, we have a goal setting discussion, community discussion coming up. So jump into that. And if anybody wants to come on screen for that one on Friday, let me know. I would love to have some guests on there. We're going to be talking about some of our goals that we have set for 2020. And what is it? Today is the first Monday of the 20s. And that's a pretty exciting thing. I haven't decided if I'm calling it the 20s or the 2020s. I'm just sort of figuring out if I should be efficient about it. The 20s just sounds so 20-ish. But
well, the 1920s was, what was it? The gay 20s?
Yeah.
Is that what they called it? So it probably wouldn't fly as well now, but what the hell? The gay 20s.